Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The J Reels Podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. The unofficial ending of summer brings a new beginning as the sports universe gets resurrected after a slow couple of months. Here to detail all of what's going on is yours truly, as this is the J Reels Podcast with your host, J Reels. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Thursday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And yes, we can now all rejoice. We can now all take a big giant inhale, and then the exhale will come from the sports world now starting to take it to shape, especially from now until we get to Super Bowl 59 down in New Orleans, to where we would have to worry at that time about another sports dead zone. But thank goodness it is all gone. That storm, or maybe it's not even a storm, maybe it was just a slight breeze that was just right in our face throughout the last couple of months, where yes, we were talking about baseball quite a bit, as well as a couple other things that happened throughout the summer. But now we could certainly wrap our arms around what's to take place here, what has taken place over the weekend, and what's to take place here, not only in the not too distant future, but certainly over the next few months. But before I even get to that, a couple of housekeeping notes. Number one, I put up a recent vlog on my YouTube channel at JReels, so if you definitely want to take a look at that, 6 months into being a full-time content creator, the 3 biggest lessons that I've learned. For those who are interested, please go there, subscribe, as well as leave a comment, send me a thumbs up. I would sincerely appreciate it. And as we all know, I put a lot of sports content on there, so I'm going to sprinkle in some lifestyle content as well. So if you could go to that channel, I would, one more time, from the bottom of my heart, really appreciate it. Number 2, of course, Olipop. Yes, we could talk about the unofficial ending of summer, but we still need to quench our thirst, right? So you could go to drinkolipop, OLIPOP.com, and then use the promo code JReels at checkout to get 15% off of your order. They have all the classic flavors that we've come to know and love over the years, especially with the big particular brands. You got a vintage cola, you got a lemon lime, you got a ginger ale, you got root beer, but you also have flavors like watermelon lime. You also have flavors like peaches and cream. What? Peaches and cream? That's a soda? Yes, it is. Banana cream, tropical punch, which is my favorite. So one more time, go to drinkolipop.com, buy a case. They also have an assorted pack, so if you just don't want to stick to one flavor, you can buy a few flavors. Buy a couple, buy a dozen cases. Send them to your family, friends, foe, frenemies, as I like to say. So if you could do that for yours truly, I would appreciate it. And then later on this week, I would think, although it's official, but I'm still just dotting some I's and crossing some T's on another sponsor to the podcast. So you definitely want to keep your eyes and ears peeled for that, as maybe as early as Thursday, that will be presented here on the next podcast. But for sure, it is coming down the pike pretty quick, fast, in a hurry. So definitely keep your eyes out for the latest sponsor, which I will reveal later on this week. So let's get to it. As far as baseball, I want to start there. I know college football, NFL, a lot to get into. U.S. Open, so much has gone on there, which I could even lead the podcast with that, but I'll spare you with that. Baseball, I want to get started with only because we're now 4 weeks away. In fact, 4 weeks from yesterday until game 162 will be played. And as we take a look at the landscape here in Major League Baseball, and I talked about this over the last few weeks, where this could be a very dry September. I get it. You have some division races that are fast and furious. In particular, the AL East, as we all know, that's going to come down to the wire. We could also take a look at what's happening to a certain degree, even in the AL Central. We thought that the AL West and maybe just a smidge, the NL West would also maybe be intriguing, considering there were just a handful of games behind, whether you're Arizona or San Diego behind the Dodgers, or in this case, the Seattle Mariners behind the Houston Astros. But now there looks to be some separation. And as we would think, both the Astros and Dodgers, who know their way around winning divisions and getting into the postseason and making some hay, we would think that when it's all said and done, we don't have to worry about that. But now we may have a bit of a twist. And although there's still 4 weeks to go and a lot is going to have to take place, but remember what I said on Thursday's podcast. And I came on thinking about this, where I figured if the Mets were to run the table to win 4 straight, meaning the final game in Arizona after a brutal loss there on Wednesday night, to compound the loss that they had on Sunday in San Diego, I felt that the Mets would have to win the next 4, and it wasn't impossible to steal a game in Arizona and then go to Chicago to play the... I can't believe how awful the White Sox are. I mean, I said, and this was not a reverse jinx, going weeks ago, and you can check the receipts, I thought that they weren't going to snap the 40-120, and granted they had 2 games less, but if they were going to match that, let's say 42-120, to have the most losses in a regular season here in the modern era of baseball, and maybe even eclipse that. And right now, based on what I saw over the weekend, it looks like they're going to eclipse it. Not to say they're going to go 35-1, what would that be? 137 off the top of my head, or 127, excuse me. I don't know if they're going to go to that extreme, but think about this. Do you believe that the Chicago White Sox, and let me just enlighten me here for a second. You know the White Sox have only won 4 games since the All-Star break? 4. They are now 4 and I believe 39 since the Midsummer Classic. And why would this change? I could see the White Sox maybe being a little bit more competitive, or maybe a team that is either going to go into the South Side there at the old Comiskey, well, whatever it's called, Progressive Rate Field, or even if the White Sox go on the road and have to play somewhere to the point where maybe the team takes them lightly, and therefore they may drop a game or maybe drop a series to the White Sox. But I can't see the White Sox winning 10 more games. They would have to go, let's see, to do the math off the top of my head. If they win 11 games, they'll be 42-120. So they would have to win 12 games to not match the 62 Mets of 120 losses. Do the White Sox have that many wins in their back pocket, considering you could count on one hand how many wins that they've had since the middle of July? So, I don't know. I hate to kind of break it to the White Sox, their fans, the organization, because when we look at the 62 Mets, that's a record that has stood for, think about it, what? 62 years. And we would think as fans that was going to go on forever. But now the White Sox are saying, hold my beer. So who knows how this is going to shape down for the White Sox here over the final stretch of this season, the final month, but it is looking as if they're going to eclipse the Mets and be the worst team throughout Major League Baseball for an 162-game schedule. So I digress there because I know I was talking about the Mets. So the Mets won those 4 games, and then with the Braves having to go to Philadelphia and thinking that if the Phillies can win 3 out of 4 and put the division to rest, which they pretty much have, even though they have 7 games against the Mets, but for the Braves to lose 3 out of 4 and for the Mets to sweep those games, and I know I did my math wrong on Thursday's podcast, so I get it, a late apology for those who listen, but I figured that the Mets would have gained 2 games, but they actually gained 3 games because I'm thinking of a head-to-head matchup with the Braves, but obviously they did not do that over the weekend, so the Mets did their business by winning the 4 games, and with the Phillies winning 3 out of 4, the Mets were able to gain 3 games in the standings, because if you recall, there were 4 games back at the Braves starting play on Thursday. So now that the Mets have gotten this close, 1 game back, and they do have a pretty easy schedule here. Not to say that the Red Sox are easy, because they're still in a fight for a playoff hunt, even though they're now, I believe, 4 in a loss and 4.5 back. But that's not going to be any easy series. And then the Reds follow suit and come into Citi Field after a day off on Thursday. So if the Mets could at least win, I hate to say it, 4 out of 6, you have to win series here. You can't lose series from here on out and expect to gain any ground. As long as you win 2 out of 3 over the course of the remaining, I guess off the top of my head, 10 series? Not less than that. About 8 or 9 series that are left, then the Mets should be in good shape. And you only get to hope that when you get to the next to last series of the year, when they have to go to Atlanta, and we all know that is a house of horrors for the Mets, as evidenced as 2 years ago on that penultimate series of the regular season where they had a 1-game lead, or actually a 2-game lead, before getting swept out of Atlanta, and all they needed to do was win the 1 game, and that would have been it. So that's all you need to know as far as the Mets and where their fate lies in front of. But great job by them. A job that I get it. It's the White Sox. You figure that even if they would have lost 1 game, you would have shrugged your shoulders and said, all right, well, they won the series. Now let's move on to play the Red Sox. But they did what they had to do. And they've gotten some timely hitting, especially out of their MVP candidate, although he's not going to win, in a one Francisco Lindor. It would be intriguing if the Mets do make it into October whether or not Lindor will get more votes as an MVP candidate than Shohei Ohtani. Because right now, Ohtani is the NL MVP, I think, in a landslide. But Lindor is certainly making his case. Let's see what he does here now over the course of this final month, because if the Mets do get into the postseason, and if Lindor continues his torrid stretch, then who knows? Maybe when it's all said and done, the NL MVP race will be a lot closer than we think. So that's what I have there. Could the Mets be that team that can overtake the Braves and get into the postseason next month? We know the history. Do I need to break it down for you people? Going back to 1998, and that's how far back, because during the wild card era, when Atlanta was part of the 5-team NL East, the Mets have absolutely done nothing. And I'm not talking about years when they were successful, whether it was in 2006, and then as well as 2015 when they won division championships and they beat up the Braves where they were running on fumes. No, I'm talking about when the money is on the line. Whether it was 98 during that playoff stretch and they fell apart, losing 5 straight. Whether it was 99, and I talked about this a few weeks ago to my guy John Guerrera. Yes, Kenny Rogers, got to bring up those bad memories. Even 2001, coming back from 9/11, yes, we could talk about the home run piazza off of Steve Carsey and winning those first 2 games before blowing the game on Sunday where they had a 4-1 lead. Armando Benitez, meltdown, Brian Jordan, 3-run homer, and then 2 weeks later, or I believe it was the week after, another meltdown in Turner Field, and you can forget about any type of playoff hopes for the Mets then. And we talked about 2 years ago, division lead the whole year, they go to Atlanta, they spit the bit, and then they lose 2 out of 3 to the Padres in the postseason, saying bye-bye, and 101 wins, Buck Showalter, etc. So it doesn't matter what decade, it doesn't matter what era, and it doesn't matter what team. The Mets and Braves, when it boils down to it, the Braves always come out on top. And yes, maybe the scene will shift. Maybe the Braves, with all their injuries and not being able to click offensively the way they did a year ago, maybe this is for them to fold like a cheap suit. But I don't trust it. And the Mets schedule is going to be tricky, especially once we get past this stretch here, these couple of home series. And then they got to go on the road. Like I mentioned, Atlanta at the end of the year, Milwaukee, 7 games against the Phillies, as I detailed a few minutes ago. So it's going to be tricky for the Mets. But I will say this, at least as of right now, they're 1 game back, and who knows, by the time we wake up, and the Braves are not playing today, the Braves actually have the Rockies coming into town, and again, the Rockies have been a little feisty, but now that they got to come east, and the Braves, as they lick their wounds leaving Philadelphia, let's see if that could be the cure-all for the Braves over the next 3 days, and see if they can stay ahead of the Mets heading into the latter part of the week. So the Mets, let's see. I am cautiously optimistic. A team that, like I said, just on Thursday, 4 games back and needed to win all 4 of these games, and the recipe certainly came out with a chef's kiss. And same for the Phillies. We could thank the Phillies for their part. And a couple of big wins. Extra innings there on Thursday, extra innings last night. That could have gone either way, as we all know, once again, extra innings, especially with the Braves, with the ghost runner. But now, the Mets, let's see what they do with the Red Sox tonight, as well as the next couple of games. And obviously, you know, I'll monitor what's going to happen there with the Braves. Now, another team that we had our eyes on, that as of last Wednesday, when they were about to take over first place in the AL Central for the first time all year, and the Royals, who had won those 3 games in Cleveland, a doubleheader Monday, and then the Tuesday game before, I don't know what happened. They had a 5-2 lead in the 6th inning, and then all of a sudden, the Guardians turned it around to the point where they ended up winning 7-5. They had a big 4-run 6th inning. They tacked on another couple of runs late. And the Royals, who were that close from taking over the AL Central and being a game ahead of the Guardians, since that moment, they went to Houston, and all they've done is just crap the bed. They got swept in Houston, pretty much dominated throughout the course of the weekend. They lost their first baseman, Vinny Pasquantino, to a broken thumb, and he's going to be out for the remainder of the regular season. Now, postseason, the Royals, we understand that they're in good stead as of this very moment, but for a team that has not really beaten good competition, and it's interesting because, and I'll get to that in a second with the schedule, because they have a chance to get themselves back into a division race with the Guardians starting today, I might add. But for what had happened after the 6th inning, or really when you got to the bottom of the 6th in Cleveland, Wednesday afternoon, from that point on, the Royals have just gone out to sea. And now let's see if they're going to regroup here to the point where they're going to be at home against Cleveland for the next 3 days. Now, mind you, they won't be able to tie or even overtake the division the way they would have last week, but they do have an opportunity to sweep here to at least get a half game back and see whether or not that they could be part of the AL Central division race. Now, as it is at this moment, the Twins, who have a 4-game series in Tampa this coming week. Now, the Twins right now are currently tied with the Royals, but I believe the Twins have a couple of games in hand. So that's something you have to keep in mind. And I think the Twins, I looked at this on Thursday, I don't think the Twins and Royals play the remainder of the year. So you're not going to have any head-to-head matchups between those two teams. And I'll take a look at that as I speak. So for the Royals, again, knowing that they have the Guardians for 3, this time in their building, and maybe they could somehow wipe away the stench of what happened there, knowing that they could have been in first place going to Houston. And as we saw, they just collapsed from that point on. But the remainder here, no, I digress. Guess who comes to town this weekend if you're the Kansas City Royals? That is the Minnesota Twins for 3 games after a day-off day on Thursday. So, with that schedule, at home, and they have a tricky schedule. Cleveland, Minnesota, then they got to come here to New York to play the Yankees for 3, and then after that, they do have Atlanta to close out in Atlanta, but sandwiched in between, a feisty Tiger team who thinks that they may be in the midst of this wild card run, as they're just a few games behind them. Then they have the Giants at Washington and then Atlanta to close it out. So a very tricky 9 days upcoming for the Royals, followed by a little bit of a soft underbelly at Pittsburgh, home to Detroit, San Francisco, who is fighting for their playoff lives, and then Washington and Atlanta, and who knows where Atlanta's going to be at that point. And if they're going to need those games, we would think as of right this moment, considering how close the NL wildcard race is, I mentioned just a few minutes ago with the Mets. But Kansas City's a team that you have to wonder whether or not, I think they're going to make it when it's all said and done, but will they be able to beat the teams that are not only good teams, but teams that are ahead of them to try to get closer to the division, to try to surpass and outlast the Twins there in their own division as well. And it's even mind-boggling to think, and I mentioned this, if not in the last podcast, maybe last week, who would have thought that when it's all said and done, and the likelihood of this happening, it probably is going to come to fruition, where you may have not 1, not 2, but 3 teams represent the AL Central in the American League playoffs? What? You would have thought easy. It would have been Yankees, Baltimore, which we're going to see. Maybe the Blue Jays at the beginning of the year. Quite possibly the Red Sox. Maybe even the Rays could have been a part of that mix. Houston, Texas. You had all those teams outside of the AL Central that we thought were going to be in this race from pretty much start to finish, whether leading the division or by the slimmest of their playoff hopes as far as a wild card goes. And the aforementioned Mariners, Rangers, Red Sox, so-so right now. Rays, Jays, they're pretty much going to be put out the pasture. You would think maybe over the course of the next 10 days, maybe even 2 weeks before we even get to the final couple of games or couple of series of the year. So strange how baseball has played out here, where I still think this could be a dry September. Obviously, things could shift on a drop of a dime, and knowing that the Mets now are quote-unquote back in this race. But another team that we have to surprisingly pay attention to, and I would have been remiss to not mention them, are the Chicago Cubs. The Cubs have now won 6 in a row, flying high to the tune where they're actually just 2 games behind the Mets and 3 behind the Braves in the NL wildcard race. Now, forget about the division, because we know that the Brewers have run and hid as they have a 9-game lead over the Cubs. But what has gone on in the north side of Chicago, where they've turned their fortunes around to the tune where the Cubs may be a threat here, and with all the work that they've done just to get to this point, is it a thing where they'll run out of gas and then fall out of the race, or are they just going to continue this magic carpet ride to possibly get to a 6th seed in the wild card before we get to the end of the month? Now, let's look at the Cubs schedule here this upcoming week. The Cubs will host the Pirates, where the Pirates, they're a dead team walking, and who knows what's going to happen there. They may start shutting down Paul Skeens, as we know, considering that he's gotten a bunch of starts and a lot of innings under his belt. And we all know with the big-time pitcher, even if you are 22 years of age and 6'6" strapping with bullets in your right arm that you could probably throw from here to Timbuktu, but we know they're going to coddle these guys. It's going to be a situation where I'm sure they're going to take the pedal off the metal or metal off the pedal, whatever you want to call it, and Skeens may not even pitch here throughout the course of this final stretch of the season, but they have the Pirates, and then after that, the Yankees come to town for 3 games, so that's going to be an intriguing series of the two old organizations dating back to the turn of the century, and that's going to be intriguing also because with the Cubs playing hot, and then you have Anthony Rizzo coming home, although he already had come home. As a matter of fact, he has not come home, come to think of it. After the trade to the Yankees, the Brahmers have not made a trip to the Windy City, so that's going to be a very interesting series for him and for the Yankees as well, because with Rizzo, who just came off the IL yesterday, 2 for 4 with a double and an RBI, I'm sure that's a homecoming that he is certainly going to be very emotional and looking forward to. So let's see what the Cubs are going to do. And looking at their schedule, they go to LA after that, Colorado, Oakland, Washington, Philadelphia. They have a very, very interesting schedule for them. That's down the road, but this week with the Pirates and Yankees, that's what they have forthcoming. And as far as anything else that's happening in baseball with the races, I'll get to that in a second, but with Rizzo coming back and even Zach Eflin, the Oriole right-hander who pitched yesterday and threw 7 innings of 9 strikeout baseball, and they need that in the worst way as the Orioles are trying to find their way and getting a little bit closer thanks to the Yankees losing 4 out of 6 to the Cardinals, as well as the 3-game series that they lost last week. And off the top of my head, it's eluding me who they lost to. It'll come to me. But for the Yankees and even for the Orioles, we know that division race is going to come down to the wire. And they also play in the next to the last game, well, next to the last series of the year in Yankee Stadium, which would be 3 weeks from today. So that's one to look out for. And then Clayton Kershaw, who knows what's going to happen with him. His toe now acting up. He's going to go on the IL. And we all know Kershaw, it's going to be about October, but we know the cloud that's over him in October. Now, he's had some success. I'm not trying to say he's been an absolute bomb in the postseason, but we know that Kershaw has not been able to match his regular season with his postseason. And as evidence is last year, when facing the Arizona Diamondbacks, he didn't even get out of the first inning and giving up 6 runs. So Kershaw, a little bit long in the tooth. Yes, he has the experience, he has the know-how, and we get it that he could throw a gem at any given moment. But we know Kershaw right now at max is a 6-inning pitcher. I'm sure they're going to ask him to go at least 5. And what you're going to get from Kershaw is pretty much, I hate to use this term, it's been said a million times, the old Forrest Gump line. It's like a box of chocolates. You don't know what you're going to get. So Kershaw, we're going to wait and see what's going to happen with him, and you're going to have an interesting series, which I'll get to in a minute when we break down the series here for the early part of this week. But as far as the races go here in Major League Baseball, we know about the AL East, broke that down. As we know, Yanks half game up over the Orioles. Then in the AL Central, the Guardians, who have a 3.5 game lead over both the Twins and Royals, but we know the Twins and Royals are in the driver's seat for the wild card. So at least they have that to fall back on, so it's not a thing where they're trying to push for a division where they know that they don't have a safety net. So that's something to keep in mind there, although I'm sure they would like to have a division victory in their back pocket only because that would mean they would host a first-round series and not have to go on the road as a 5-6 matchup with the Orioles or Yankees when the season completes and who gets that slot. So we'll keep that in mind there as we move it along. Seattle, I think they're toast. 6 games behind and 6 in a loss of the Houston Astros, as the Astros have now won 5 in a row after losing that series to the, I was going to say Eagles. Could you imagine? I'm already on football. To the Phillies, where they won that final game, and I guess that got so much juice and their confidence built up to the point where, as we talked about, they swept the Royals over the weekend. So that division to me is a formality. Phillies were what they did over the weekend, a 7-game lead over the Braves. No shock there. And we talked about the race there in the NL. To me, it's Braves, Mets, and now you have to include the Cubs there. I'm not going to include the Giants or any other team south of that. And then, of course, with the Central, Brewers, we already talked about them. They're going to be division champs. And then you have Dodgers, D-backs, and Padres, who are now 5 back and 6 in a loss for the Padres, as the Diamondbacks have a game in hand over San Diego. So the Dodgers should be home free. And then the wild card in the AL, as we talked about, Twins, Royals, and then you're going to have the Red Sox, who are now what? As I mentioned, 4 back in the loss, 4.5 back, followed by the Tigers, who are just 5 back and 1 game behind the Red Sox. So I only include them, and in Seattle's 5.5. They're actually closer to a wild card than they are in the division, so I guess I have to include them as of right this second. The Rays are 2 games under, 7 back. Forget about them. So I'm going to include the Tigers and Mariners for now, only because they're just a half game and a game behind the Red Sox just for the second place or really first place, second loser in the wild card hunt there in the American League. But that's what you have. That is your baseball, but let's get to the schedule this week. Early on. Today, you have a 4-game series wrapping up between LA and Arizona. Arizona lost the first 2 games before winning yesterday by a football score 14-3. Let's see if they can split that series, and no harm, no foul as far as the division goes. But for any other game that's going to take place here or any other series, I talked about Minnesota, Tampa Bay, 4-game series there. Boston, New York, as you know. Seattle, Oakland, I believe that's a 4-game series for those who are interested there in the Mariners' fate. Yankees are in Texas for 3 before going to Chicago. The Pirates, as we talked about, going to Chicago too, as they're in the hunt there in the National League wild card. But the other series that you have of note, Dodgers go to Anaheim to play the Angels. So this is Shohei Ohtani's first time in his old ballpark since him signing on the dotted line there up the freeway with the Dodgers. So I'm sure that's going to be those 2 buildings or those 2 games sold out in that building tomorrow night and on Wednesday. So let's see what Ohtani does in front of his former home fans. So that's one to watch. Houston at Cincinnati, only because I bring up the Astros and where they are right now. And that's pretty much it. Detroit's at San Diego because, of course, Detroit's in the mix. Arizona then has a 2-game series at San Francisco. And that pretty much does it. Chicago, the White Sox playing Baltimore. And the White Sox have lost 7 in a row. And if the Orioles are going to get closer in the division or at least continue to pad on some wins, well, here's the time to do it as they'll face the White Sox here. But other than that, that's what you have. Colorado, Atlanta, we talked about. Cleveland and Kansas City. Mentioned that a little bit. Let's see if Kansas City could exact some revenge from that series, which would have been a season-defining series for them. I know I'm all out of whack here today, people. I don't know what it is. A little out of it internally, but I'm good overall. But maybe my words are just not coming out as fast as what's going on upstairs in the memory bank. But that's your schedule here for the early part of the baseball week. You know I'm going to be on top of this as we move it along. Now, speaking of moving it along, let me get on the helmet and shoulder pad so I can go through what's happening in college football, because we had the opening weekend. To me, in essence, this was it, not the previous weekend, as we know, with Florida State, who plays tonight against Boston College in their building. And I would think Florida State, having to sit on that loss for 9 days, they're just going to blow the doors off of Boston College, which will be on ABC tonight to cap off the holiday weekend. But to me, what I looked at over the course of the weekend, I'm going to talk about the big games only. The Georgia Bulldogs. And I talked about this on Thursday as a little bit of a preview, how I think they're going to play with a chip on their shoulder. That's a team that is trying to get the bad taste out of their mouths after losing to Alabama. And yes, playing in a bowl game, just taking the Seminoles to the back of the woodshed, and we know the final score in that game, and having to sit on that all spring and pretty much the majority of the summer, and Clemson comes in, and I understand this isn't Clemson of Trevor Lawrence, just like I said a couple days ago, but for Georgia to lay the smackdown, Carson Beck, who I talked about being a Heisman Trophy finalist, and what did they do? They just put the brakes on him. 34-3, and for Kirby Smart, you know that this is going to be, I would think, I'm sure in the locker room, they're saying this is going to be a season of reckoning for the Georgia Bulldogs to get themselves back to that lofty perch of being back-to-back champions of 3 years ago and 2 years ago, and we all know last year was Michigan. So I think, granted, it's one game, and I know we can't just get all out of sorts to think that, oh, Georgia's back. Oh, this is going to be a season to remember. This is going to be a vendetta season. Like I mentioned, a season of reckoning. But I'm sure within those walls there in Athens, it is going to be a type of season that maybe when it's all said and done, and I understand one game, And a big game is going to face them here in 3 weeks when they have to go to Alabama. And that's going to be an interesting test. And someone who is corresponding with me on my YouTube channel said that, I don't know about Georgia this year. Yes, they did beat Clemson, but Clemson, obviously, they don't have the offense that they once did, as we know. But they do have 3 games on their schedule at Alabama, at Ole Miss, and then they also have to go to, the other game will lose me right now. Let me see if I can pull that up real quick. There were those 3 games that I knew that were going to be key on their schedule. Not Tennessee. Bear with me 1 second as I pull this up. But Georgia has the 3 games on the docket. And I believe at Florida. And as we saw there with Florida, that was a beating in its own right with Cam Ward, 3 touchdowns. That's going to be the second game I was going to get to. But they have to go, I believe, to the Swamp to play the Gators. And those are the games that are going to be put on notice from here on out. And whether or not they lose those games or one of those games, now granted, they can lose 2 and they'll be fine. They're going to make the college football playoff. But we all know if Georgia's going to be that team this year, they're either going to run the table or maybe have the one loss. And one of those losses would have to come, I would think, on the road because I can't see them losing any of these games at home. I just can't. And for Georgia, let me pull up their schedule real quick just to make sure that I'm on the right page here. I believe Florida is the other game that they're going to. And if it's not, no, as a matter of fact, it's at Texas. Last year, they did play at Florida. Florida's coming to them. Should have known that off the top of my head. I just had Florida stuck on the brain because now I'm thinking about the next game when they lost to Miami. But they got to go to Texas. So that's certainly going to be a tricky game. Alabama, as we know, on the 28th of this month. And then they will have to go to Ole Miss there on the 9th of November. So those are 3 games that they can actually lose. Isn't out of the realm of possibility. But right now, at least for one game, and not to get all geeked up over it, but I think Clemson certainly has a lot of work to do. But Georgia certainly did what they had to do there in their opening game. And then as far as Miami goes, what a performance there by Cam Ward. 385 yards, 3 touchdowns. He did throw a pick there, but still they were able to just put the stomp and the chomp on the Gators there Saturday afternoon. And Miami, let's see. Is this going to be a thing where they're going to come back to the hurricane prominence of the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s? Let's hold it there for a second there. We certainly not want to get out of hand, but for that one game, because to me, the Gators, they're not the Gators as we've come to know and love, especially over the years. I'm not even going to go back to the Steve Spurrier years, but for Miami, give it up. In-season, or I should say in-state rivalry here to start off their season, and they came away with flying colors. So no ifs, ands, buts about that. So let's see if the Hurricanes can build off that, and the Gators, tail between their legs, are going to have to start over and see where they could go from there. And then the nightcap there, you had Notre Dame, who are in pretty much a rock fight with the Aggies there down in College Station, and they pulled away late. Game was tied 13. They were able to get a touchdown to make it 20-13, and then on a turnover and downs, they tacked on a field goal. But the Fighting Irish, who fought to the very end, and it looked like maybe that the Aggies were going to have their chances, but they were unable to capitalize and unable to get into the end zone, even after a defensive struggle there for the first 3+ quarters. But give it up. Notre Dame, who you know is going to be a player throughout the year, you know that there will be a part of this college football playoff mix. They got a tough win, and one that's going to maybe carry them here over the next few weeks. So kudos to the Fighting Irish for getting off to a good start. And A&M, I'm sure they're kicking themselves for not being able to, at least in their building, to show their fans that they could beat a good team, a top-ranked team, and that one just fell by the wayside for the Aggies. And then last night you had, to me, which was a lot more of an intriguing game over the weekend. Yes, you could say maybe a little bit with Notre Dame and Texas A&M, but you had LSU and USC, with it being a pseudo-home game for the Trojans, considering it was played in Vegas at Allegiant Stadium. And what you saw there was an upset, where LSU, a lot of people think that the Tigers, they're going to try to build off of what they did last year. And for LSU, when we're talking about them, it's national championship or bust. But considering under their first-year coach Brian Kelly, and Kelly left the stadium fuming, banging tables, just going crazy to the point where they lost 27-20 on that final drive, and that's where it all boiled down to. The game was tied at 20, final drive where you got that great catch there by Kyron Hudson, and Hudson, who made that remarkable catch, if you saw there early on, where it was an OBJ-like catch there in the first half. But for that catch, and then they targeted the defensive player who hit Hudson after making that catch, which tacked on more yards, which already set him up in field goal position from the catch itself. But then now, with 18 seconds left, touchdown run there by Woody Marks, which pretty much iced the game for them. And even though there was not much time on the clock for the Tigers to try to take a stand and see if they could get a Hail Mary or maybe even an old Stanford Cal play, but the quarterback there, who had a very good game in his own right for LSU, and maybe they got a player there and a one, Garrett Nussmeier, but he threw a pick there and had a very good game, like I mentioned. Was what? I think 29 for 38, 300 some odd yards, 2 touchdowns, had a very good game. But unfortunately, it was not enough. They fell short, and that final drive just killed them as far as not being able to withstand any pressure from the Trojans. And the Trojan quarterback had a big game as well in his own right. But give it up for what USC did on yesterday, I was going to say Saturday. And just a big-time performance there by their quarterback and their wide receiver as well. And, of course, the quarterback that I'm referring to is a one, Miller Moss. But I want to make sure with Kyron Hudson that, because you had a couple of Kyrons in the game, even a Kyron there on LSU. So I certainly don't want to get it all mixed up, because I'm just trying to get my college football equilibrium, especially over the weekend, trying to watch and follow as we are now got not only college football, but the NFL will be a part of our consciousness near in the next few days. But yes, Hudson, who had those big catches, and the other Kyron for LSU was Kyron Lacey. So, and both of them with different spellings. So with that being said, that is your college football weekend. And I know LSU, they're going to look at this as hopefully a building block, as a learning lesson, especially from the defensive side. And for Brian Kelly, I'm sure that was not a pleasant flight home to the Bayou. And for USC, I'm sure that was a nice 40-minute flight back to SoCal. And let's see if they can build off of that. And for USC, again, now part of the Big Ten, no Pac-12 anymore. And with college football tonight to cap off, as I mentioned, with Florida State and Boston College, that is your college football. Thursday, I'll get into the Saturday schedule. We'll talk more about week 2 in college football when we reconnect there later on in the week. All right, now real quick before I get my attention to a few other things, and there's quite a few people, now that the sports world will really be spinning on its axis. NFL real quick, I want to talk about some over-under numbers. And as we know, I'll have an NFL preview there on Thursday, which I look forward to. I'll have it for you Thursday, not live. Actually, that would have been interesting to stream live. I'll have to think about that maybe for down the road. But here it is with the NFL. Schedule, as we know, starts Thursday. Baltimore, Kansas City. I know there was some talk there with Justin Tucker, microphone in his face with the whole gamesmanship AFC Championship game kicking on the Chiefs side of their field during warm-ups, etc. He just said, I'm focusing on the game Thursday against the defending 2-time champs, etc. So obviously took the high road. But here it is. I'm not picking my over-under numbers until Thursday, but here's what we got. I'm going to go alphabetical, top to bottom. Maybe I'll pick one or maybe hint at one or two. And of course, over-unders are what Vegas puts out every year. And am I going to pick over or under 6 teams? Usually I pick 3 overs, 3 unders. Sometimes I go 4-2 depending. And this starts to stretch, people, as we get into the fall where the NBA I'm going to pick over-unders, and with the NHL I'm going to pick point total over-unders. So over the course of the next 6 weeks, it's going to be fast and furious with these over-unders. So let me begin. Arizona 5.5. They may have a long year, even though Kyler Murray back, but that could be about right. I don't know. Maybe I'd even pick them as an over right now, but that's probably 5 wins could be correct. Falcons 8.5. If you're watching on YouTube, I'm looking into the camera. 8.5? That is screaming over. You know what? Put it in the bank. I'll tell you why come Thursday. Falcons 8.5 is an over with the quarterback, Kirk Cousins. I'm not making him out to be Johnny Unitas, but he is an upgrade over what they've had over the last few years in a one Marcus Mariota and Desmond Ridder. And the defense, they got a couple of reinforcements here throughout the course of training camp. 8.5, that is a low number. And remember, last year there was the same number, and I picked them as an under, and they won 8 games. So call that one maybe 2 years in a row, but on the flip side. Ravens 10.5 is an over. Buffalo 9.5 is an over. Carolina 4.5 under. Oof. And that's the lowest number in the NFL, I might add. Bears 7.5 is an over, or as their over-under number. That is one I'm flirting with as an over. Not in the bank like Atlanta, but keep that one in mind. Bengals 9.5 is an over. Browns 7.5 is an over. Wow, that is a low number. 7.5, and they won, I believe, 12 last year, and they were a wild card team, so keep that in mind. Dallas 9.5 is an over. I think that was a number last year, and they blew that to smithereens. Denver 4.5, tied with the Panthers as the worst. Lions 9.5 is an over, and look at that, as an over. 9.5 is their number. Come on, J Reels, get it together. Packers 8.5, Houston 8.5, Indy 7.5, Jacksonville 7.5. Wow, they got that low. I guess maybe what happened last year, Doug Peterson, is there a little bit of a falling out there? I don't know. Chiefs 11.5, that's the biggest number in the sport. There may be another team, but I think that's the highest. Raiders 5.5, Chargers 7.5, Rams 7.5, Dolphins 8.5, Minnesota 5.5. Wow, the Vikings that low? Well, listen, Sam Darnold's the starting quarterback. That's all you need to know. Patriots 4.5 to go with Carolina and Denver. New Orleans 6.5, Giants 5.5, Jets 8.5, Eagles 9.5, Pittsburgh 8.5, San Francisco 10.5, Seattle 6.5, Tampa 6.5. Wait, am I reading that right? Tampa was a playoff team and they got them at 6.5? Wow, these numbers are out of whack. And I just checked these numbers early this morning, people. So this isn't a list that I got from after the draft and after free agency. This wasn't in the middle of the summer. I was bored. Let me see what the over-under numbers are. No, this was this morning. Tennessee 5.5 and Washington 5.5. I will say this. There are a lot of numbers here that I can't even remember having numbers where I can even pick my over-under numbers right now. Because you always know that that is right there. That this team, 8.5, 9.5. Ooh, wow, do I take that team? And not that there are 10 or 12 teams, but there are more than 6 teams that I can look at and say, wait a second, that's their numbers? Come on, Cleveland 7.5, and I get it, it's a competitive division. Just think about this. Baltimore 7.5, Pittsburgh 8.5, and Bengals 9.5. So they have the Browns at 7.5. But the Browns won 12 games last year, and Joe Flacco was their quarterback, and they went through 4 different quarterbacks last year. Why are they 7.5? Do they think Deshaun Watson's going to be out after week 5? I don't know. But that just goes to show you where these numbers are. Wait a second, really? And I'm not a betting man. I do this for fun, people, but who knows? Maybe I'll be able to not be puzzled to come up with 6 picks when it's all said and done. So just keep that in mind as we get to Thursday's pod. Now, other things happen here in the NFL. You finally got Brandon Aiyuk signing on the dotted line, 4 years, $120 million. So he gets his money. No shock there. But now, as we get to week 1, in all essence, it starts on Sunday. What's going to happen with Dak Prescott? We understand that the talking head shows and the debate shows, everything's the Cowboys, and I'm sick and tired of it. And I'm bringing it up now, and only now, because will the deal be done for Dak or Micah by the time we get to Sunday? If you ask me, I don't think that's going to be the case. I would think maybe more for Micah than for Dak, but I think this is a sing for your supper for Dak Prescott as of right this moment, because he is going into a walk year. He's a guy that, we get it. Where else are you going to go as far as the quarterback position when it comes to what he's been able to do in a regular season? He was number 2 in the MVP vote last year. But when it comes to January, it's almost as if the glass slipper just shatters. So I can see why Jones has paused this long in order to get Dak to really believe and to really feel that if you're going to be a Cowboy, this is a big year. And I'm sure that's what the organization is telling him, whether they have vocalized that to him, his representation or not. But actions speak louder than words. And if nothing gets done, unless it's on a cocktail napkin on the flight to Cleveland, where who knows, maybe that could happen. And that has happened in the past with certain transactions with big-time players in any sport, not just football or basketball. We've seen it. So let's see. We think that Parsons is going to be a part of that team because he's young, because he's a defensive force. He's a game-wrecking player, and Dak has not proven himself in January, so therefore he's a lame duck. So that's going to be fascinating to see what's going to happen there, as well as Hassan Reddick, because we talked about this with Reddick, the trade from Philadelphia to the Jets, and he said that he was going to show up even without, he has a deal, but even without him re-signing, and of course he has not shown up. he's pulled a Michael Strahan, not to compare him to Michael Strahan, but we know in that 2007 season, he took the whole summer off, came back, and we all know what happened that 2007 year. The Giants miraculously went to a Super Bowl and beat the undefeated Patriots. And then, of course, went off to the sunset. Not to compare that by any stretch, but it's a situation where he's taking the whole summer off, and whether or not the Jets will get him on the dotted line, I think they will when it's all said and done. What that contract or the terms will be, who knows? But I would think, maybe for Micah, maybe for Reddick, Dak, would I be shocked? I would not. But I wouldn't be surprised if he's not signed there before the opening kickoff in Cleveland there Sunday afternoon. And then some crazy news, and I know I'm going to have to segue from crazy to just bad news. Or really, let's say this. Bad, but at least it's a little bit, there's a silver lining to it. And then worse, which will be the next thing. Rickey Pearsall, the first-round pick of the Niners, who was at an autograph signing outside of Chinatown in downtown San Francisco, was shot in a robbery attempt and had a bullet go through his chest and out through his back. Thankfully, he's in stable condition. At first, it was serious, but stable. And who knows what his prognosis is going to be. Obviously, I think he's going to be fine, but I don't think he's going to suit up week one. I don't even think he'll be on the sidelines as he's recovering from this, where a 17-year-old kid, think about this, 17 years old, I don't know if he knows or knew who Rickey Pearsall was if he fell on him. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't, but this happened in broad daylight, 3:30 after an autograph signing, to where he attempted to rob him. I don't know if it was, who knows if Pearsall was wearing some drip or he was iced out. I don't know. Again, he is a rookie, so I don't know what, maybe he was about to get in his car and he was standing in front of a Lamborghini, who knows. But for him to be involved in this fracas, which turned out to be near fatal, and thanks to his mom, I know she had posted something on social media where he's doing fine, he's progressing slowly but surely, and that is just a great sign. But oh my goodness, could you even imagine something like that happening? It wasn't 3:30 a.m. coming out of a club, and we all know a lot of those incidents happen at that time, or just whatever it may be. And here it was in broad daylight where this happened, and thankfully it looks like he's going to recover. So that is just great news as I put a cap on the NFL news and notes. And then now I got to segue to probably one of the more awful stories that you ever hear of as I lace up my skates. When I read on Thursday morning that Johnny Gaudreau not only had died, but also his brother was involved on, or maybe it was Friday morning, this happened Thursday night, my apologies, to where in South Jersey, outside of Philadelphia, riding at around 8:15 in the evening, where both Johnny and Matthew Gaudreau were struck by a vehicle. And based on what I read was that the vehicle was trying to pass on the right, and we all know that that is a no-no. And because he was trying to pass on the right in speed, on top of the driver being under the influence, struck both Johnny and Matt to the point where they perished at the scene. And this, I might add, just to make matters even, go from awful to just downright terrible. They were in South Jersey because the following day they were going to attend their sister's wedding. And this is on the heels of Matthew, the younger brother, who I believe he and his wife were expecting. Now, I don't know if they were expecting, they just had a baby. I should know that. But I know that the family, based on them all getting together to celebrate the marriage of their sister. And here it is, less than 24 hours before, they have to find out that both brothers were dead from this bike car accident. And Gaudreau, who's had big years in Calgary, last 2 years with the Columbus Blue Jackets, good goal scorer, 7-time All-Star, a guy who, obviously, from all accounts, very good guy. A lot of these guys in the NHL, they all seem to be good. There's very few that are bad, or very few that are checkered with a particular past, or you don't read or hear about them a lot. Then I get you have a few. They're not perfect. We understand that. We're all human. But But Gaudreau's had a very good NHL career, as we know. Like I mentioned, the All-Star appearances, and had a big year with Calgary. His last year in Calgary had 40 goals, 100 and some odd points before going and signing a deal with the Blue Jackets. And the Blue Jackets, as we know, they were a dreadful team, part of a rebuild, and him being a part of that. But there were just so many good stories that had come out over the days just to commemorate and to remember the life of Johnny Gaudreau, that it's just, oh man, I mean, this just hits the bottom of your stomach. I mean, there's no other way to explain it. And you can't even say thoughts, prayers, and condolences. I mean, because how many prayers and how many just well wishes and trying to send positive vibes and energy. And of course, the wedding was canceled. And I mean, you cannot come up with just a more tragic, a more just awful story than that. I don't even know how else to put it. And just thinking about it, it still doesn't sit well with me. I just have to turn the page and move on from there. There isn't, again, what more can I say? What more can I add? Just tragedy on so many levels there, and to happen to both brothers, and there's nothing else to say. You also had a signing where I wonder what happened to the Carolina Hurricanes. Why it took so long for them to sign Seth Jarvis, 6 years. I should say 8 years. I'm all over the map, people. I don't know what's happening with me. So my apologies for all the flubs here throughout the course of this podcast. I know this has not been my crisp, usual self. And yes, I may flub here and there with names and things of that nature, but I got numbers wrong. I got words. But let me continue here. 8 years, $63 million. Seth Jarvis, a draft pick of the 2020 NHL campaign, and for him to get the big payday, I don't know why the Hurricanes took a long time. Maybe they were trying to hammer out years, money, who knows, but the Hurricanes got their man and won Seth Jarvis there, as he'll be part of the fold over the course of almost a decade. All right, now let me move on. I have a couple other things before I say goodbye. U.S. Open, and there's a lot to unpack here, and I know I'm probably going to go past an hour. Let me just see where I'm at here on my time. Yes, I'm getting close to that hour here, so let me detail, but at least try to package this nicely. You can look at this two ways. If you're a dyed-in-the-wool tennis fan, I'm sure you're probably thinking there's a faction that's looking at it like, all right, we don't have to see Novak Djokovic's face put up another trophy over his head, or Carlos Alcaraz win his third straight Grand Slam final, as he did in the French and Wimbledon. Or even on the women's side to say, all right, Coco Gauff, the defending champ, we don't have to see her win back-to-back titles. Okay, that's fine and dandy that you're going to have a maybe not a fresh face, but a fresher face win the U.S. Open that's not named Alcaraz, that's not named Gauff, that's not named Djokovic. But then there's the flip side of that, where you're not going to see Djokovic here this week, you're not going to see Alcaraz here this week, you're not going to see Gauff. Pretty much the heavyweights of the sport. Where some people may say, all right, great, I'm tired of seeing these people or these players, I want to see somebody else. If you choose that, you have every right. It's all good. But then there's going to be the other side that's like, wait, no Djokovic, no Alcaraz, no Gauff, I'm not going to watch. Goodbye. I'm looking forward to NFL Week 1, where you may not see Djokovic and Alcaraz clash in another final. And I get it that the NFL is going to swallow up and spit out the tennis, but at least maybe have an eye on it. Or maybe during a commercial, you'll flick back and forth to see, what's happening with Djokovic and Alcaraz. If that was the case, or even Djokovic-Sinner, if Sinner and Alcaraz were to match up against one another because they were on that side of the draw, and if Sinner knocked out Alcaraz, at least you have the young upstart and Sinner go up against the veteran, the old guard, and one Djokovic. But you're not going to see that, people, because on Thursday, Alcaraz was ousted in straight sets by Botic Van de Zandschulp, and I have to say that 3 times, me with names, people, but in straight sets. And Alcaraz admitted in the post-match interview that busy summer, lot went on, lost in Cincinnati where he destroyed his racket, lost a gold medal to Djokovic, of course, winning there, not only at the French there in the middle of June, but also in the middle of July at Wimbledon. And he even admitted that he didn't say it in this way, shape, or form, but if you read between the lines, he underestimated and took Van de Zandschulp for granted. I mean, it's all the way, no other way to slice it and dice it. For him, and he even mentioned, and let me see if I can pull up a quote here. his own admission was he was expecting to get a bunch of mistakes from Van de Zandschulp that he didn't adjust because what he saw from Van de Zandschulp was something that he wasn't expecting or certainly wasn't forecasting while the match was being played. Therefore, he didn't make adjustments. Therefore, he was mentally shot. And for him to lose in straight sets like that was just mind-blowing. And then I thought to myself, I said, well, this is going to be Djokovic's sinner no matter what now at this point. And then the next night, Djokovic said, you know what? I'm going to follow you on the next flight out of here because he lost, not in straight sets, but lost in 4 sets. After losing the first 2, he did win the 3rd set, but lost in the 4th set to Alexei Popyrin. And I couldn't believe that when I saw that yesterday morning or Saturday morning when I woke up. So you had the number 2 and number 3 seed gone out from the opening week to where now you go into this week, Sinner's going to be the favorite. And we would think that this is going to be his tournament to lose. But there is a guy, and check those receipts 2 Mondays ago, Daniil Medvedev. He knows his way around this surface. He knows the way around this terrain. He had won a U.S. Open 3 years ago against Djokovic. So he's a guy that, I'm not going to say he's laying in the weeds, but when you think Casper Ruud out, when you think Andrei Rublev out, when you think Djokovic out, Alcaraz out, Tsitsipas out, and for those guys that we would think would have gone into this week, all those guys are nowhere to be found. So the last men standing here are Medvedev, and he's going to face a guy that I never heard of in Nuno Borges today, so you would think he's going to go on to the quarterfinal. Tommy Paul will face Jannik Sinner tonight, so let's see what Tommy Paul, how he'll stack up against Sinner. Then you have Francis Tiafoe, who beat Grigor Dimitrov, and Dimitrov was a guy who a lot of people thought was going to beat Rublev. I'm sorry, that Rublev was going to beat Dimitrov because they faced one another, but Rublev out. So Dimitrov now will face Tiafoe, and it would have been interesting because Tiafoe would have faced the winner of, I believe, Tommy Paul Sinner to go to the next match. So let's see what's going to happen there with Tiafoe against Dimitrov, and then you're going to have Taylor Fritz against Alexander Zverev, another key top flight men's player there. So you're going to have a whole different combination as what we've been accustomed to when we're watching the men's side here over the course of this week. And then the women's side, Coco Gauff being ousted, and she did not play well even in her match there on Friday when she beat Alina Svitolina. She lost the first set, 6-3 with a bunch of bad play there, and then she had to come back to win the final 2 sets before losing in straight sets to Emma Navarro there just a couple days ago. And yes, this just goes to show you how bad she was. She had more double faults than winners, 19-14, and that's all you need to know about Gauff. Who knows, maybe she did not, because of her performance there on Friday, she didn't shake that off against Navarro there, and now Navarro advances and moves on. And then you do have a scenario where you do have some top-flight women's players still left. You still have Iga Świątek, who has a lot to prove here, although she won a U.S. Open a couple of years ago, but considering other than the French, she hasn't done much after that, so she's done well to this point. Let's see if she can carry it all the way to a final and win. We also have Aryna Sabalenka, who I think is going to win the tournament and win the whole thing. It would be nice to see Świątek and Sabalenka in the final. We'll have to wait and see what's going to happen there. Give it up to Jasmine Paolini. She has had a phenomenal year here. She is one of 2 players to only play 4 rounds here in the course of this calendar year in a Grand Slam. The only other was Coco Gauff, who had played 4 rounds, and now Paolini's looking to go back to another final. As you know, she made it to a French Open final as well as a Wimbledon final here over the course of the summer, and now let's see if she can three-peat it. But she's going to have to seal the deal. Does that mean she'll get past the aforementioned Świątek? I don't know what side of the draw she's on. She's 5th. So she may be, off the top of my head, she could be on Świątek's side. So she may see her in a semifinal. So that we'll have to wait and see. You also have Elena Rybakina, who's a top-flight player. She had to leave because of an injury, so she had to withdraw. So we're not going to see her throughout the rest of this tournament. And Naomi Osaka, who had won her first-round match and upsetting Jelena Ostapenko, was unable to get past Karolina Muchova. And even though she's a big name, but still trying to get her feet wet after being off a year and a half, So you can kind of understand why she didn't have any length or at least get into the weekend if you're Naomi Osaka. But here are your top flight players that are left. Jessica Pegula, who's had a very good tournament to date. Caroline Wozniacki, who, as we all know, is a former number one. She makes it into this week. So let's see how far she could go. And the aforementioned Swiatek, Paulini, and Sabalenka are left. I'm rooting for Sabalenka. I can see Swiatek maybe trying to wipe away a lot of the dust and dirt from what has taken place here since the French being ousted in the first round at Wimbledon, and now really showing some teeth and some mettle here to see if she could get to a final, a U.S. final at that, or U.S. Open final, and win that. So, should be an interesting week. I understand you don't have your usual suspects there, but I'm certainly fascinated by the play, and you know what? It's a little bit different, and I don't mind it. So, if you're going to ask me, are you happy to see Djokovic, Alcaraz, and even Gauff out? I'm not going to say I'm happy to, but you know what? Hey, tennis takes a different direction. I don't mind it. If this was a thing where these guys were dropping like flies in the first round or two, then I would be concerned and be like, oh man, do these guys even have it? So you know what? It's a little break from the norm. I don't mind it. I think it's good for tennis, but for even the casual or maybe even the good sports fan, once they see those guys out, they probably think, I don't like tennis anyway, and if Djokovic's not there, to kind of keep maybe not a watchful eye, but just every now and again peek in to see what's going on, they're going to be out, so you're going to lose that fan. But that's what you have with the tennis. I'm looking forward to it to see how it all shakes down here over the course of the remainder of this week. And then NBA, you had some signings here, and they all signed with their same teams. I know Steph Curry. Do I even need to get in these signings? Lonnie Walker signed 1 year with the Celtics, which I was a little surprised by, considering I don't know how much money the Celtics had left when you think about it. But this is a guy who's bounced around San Antonio, the Lakers, the Nets, and he can make threes. He was up there in three-point shooting percentage, I believe, last year and even the year before with the Lakers. So that just adds another weapon there to the wing. And then Ivica Zubac and TJ McConnell re-upped with the Clippers and the Pacers there. But to close it all out, yesterday was the FedEx Cup in golf as I whip out the golf clubs. And Scottie Scheffler, who's had a phenomenal year. There's no ifs, ands, buts, babies about it. Won a Masters, has won 6 matches on the tour, including yesterday the FedEx Cup, which he won $25 million, and is ranked number 1 in the world. And we know he got arrested earlier this year, unjust, I might add, but got arrested, has been near the top of the leaderboard. I know he fell apart there at the PGA, but still has been a threat, and we get it. He is by far the number 1 player. But Scottie Scheffler, although he doesn't take a backseat to anybody, but I wonder if there anybody in the Xander Schauffele camp would think, hey, wait a second. This guy's won 2 majors back-to-back, the PGA and the U.S. Open. And although those are his only 2 wins on the tour this year, and Scottie Scheffler deserves to be number 1, but could you argue that Schauffele's had the better year because he has 2 majors in his back pocket? Or if you're Scottie Scheffler and you did win yesterday, and I didn't follow the tournament by any stretch, and I know FedEx Cup is not a major tournament. I get it when it comes to the points and the standings, etc. It's a big win, $25 million that he won, a big-time purse there for that tournament, and for Scheffler to have the year he's had, and granted he deserves to be number 1. But I would think if there are any Scottie Scheffler haters or Xander Schauffele cheerleaders, I would think that they would probably look at, well, that's not a major tournament. Yes, he did win the Masters. Yes, he's won 2 Masters now in his career, but Schauffele won back-to-back, and he won 2 majors. That has to account for something. Now, it's not as if Schauffele is 4th or 5th overall as far as the golf rankings are concerned. He is 2nd. But could you argue the fact that maybe Schauffele could be more deserving of a number 1 spot than Scheffler? I have to say no, because based on what he's done throughout the course of the year, 6 wins is still 6 wins, and I get it. Winning majors are tough, let alone winning regular golf tournaments are tough. He's won 6 of them. That has to account for something, including the Masters. And I get it. Schauffele is deserving. But you have to give it to Scottie Scheffler right now as being, pound for pound, by far, the best golfer in the world. That'll do it, my good people. Another episode just about in the books. As always, thank you so much for stopping by. I appreciate you carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the world of sports. If you haven't done so, subscribe to my YouTube channel at JReels. Of course, the podcast will be up there as well as shorts. I didn't put up any shorts there yesterday. The podcast will be up there as well as whatever shorts I'm going to put out throughout the course of the day. Obviously, throughout the course of the week, the sports world and the universe has shifted, so you know I'm going to put up a ton of content, people, including some lifestyle content. So please subscribe there, leave a comment as I try to get to just surpass 400, and I got to get to 409 before I get to 450, 500, 600, etc. But please, people, do your part if you can. I would be forever grateful and thankful for that. And as well as the podcast, Apple, Spotify, also video on Spotify, at JReels, of course, on YouTube, jreels.com. And if you want to hit me up with a question, comment, or a suggestion, you could do so at the following. The social media accounts are Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, The JReels Podcast, Twitter, X, JReels1, just a number. The old-fashioned way to JReelsPodcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. This is my full-time gig. 6.5 years I've been doing this, but for the last, now going on 7 months, I've been doing this full-time. So please, tell your family, friends, foes, frenemies, as well as the drinkolipop.com. Don't forget that either, people. Tell them once, tell them all. Please do your part, because I will continue to deliver the fire, passion, energy, fury with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JReels Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx to South Beach to South Central to South Pacific and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JReels Podcast, on the flip, baby.